Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Progressive American Report. I'm your host, Connor Kelly. Today I'm speaking with Dr. Greta Uehling from the University of Michigan. She is a cultural anthropologist specializing in the study of war, conflict, and population displacement. She is the author of Beyond Memory, The Deportation and Repatriation of the Crimean Tatars and Everyday War, The Conflict over Donbass, Ukraine. Today we are discussing her new book, Decolonizing Ukraine, The Indigenous People of Crimea and Pathways to Freedom. Thanks for joining me, Dr. Uehling.
Happy to be here.
So I want to just start off with the general context for how this book started out. What were some of the considerations that went into writing the book? What were some of the concerns that you had about how it would be received? And what were some of the challenges that you had by going to Ukraine and Crimea specifically?
Some of the key protagonists in the book are members of Ukraine's largest indigenous group, the Crimean Tatars, and I've actually been working with them since the late 90s. So, as a result of this ongoing research, I was acutely aware that the literature about Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine often overlooks their experience, even though they are among some of the most affected by the illegal annexation. And so, as your listeners may or may not know, for centuries they comprised the vast majority of the population on the population of Crimea. And so, while the world has been focused on the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, this book takes readers back to the war's inception with the occupation of Crimea. And I delve into the experiences of the people who were actually there when Russia colonized or recolonized Crimea, some of whom fled for government controlled Ukraine. And so I think what their stories show is how the Russian operation dispossessed them of their dreamed of futures, but also how these losses became a catalyst for finding um, a new way to be Ukrainian and embracing values, common Ukrainian values. And so it's really, as a whole, a story of, their striking resilience.
I think one of the things that is especially interesting to me about this book is not just the fact that this is about the war in Ukraine, but it's specifically focusing on how identity has evolved. And recently, Vladimir Putin has made some rather interesting comments about Ukrainian identity, namely that he claimed that Ukrainians and Russians are one and the same. How do narratives like that from the Russian government influence not only how the Crimean Tatars view themselves, but also how they basically fight for their own future in the larger conflict?
What you're describing reminds me of a woman who left Crimea after it was occupied, and she told me how the Russian authorities there tried to make her accept a Russian passport.
Mm.
And she said, "No, I'm fine with my Ukrainian passport. I don't want a Russian passport." And they said, "Ukraine, that state doesn't even exist." Right. And so I think that these comments are an example of the kind of epistemic violence, right? Telling a people that they don't exist as a people, telling a state that it's not real, is a kind of epistemic violence that is exactly what Ukraine is trying to free itself from in over the past decade, right? Like, this is exactly what Ukrainians are fighting for, which is the freedom to disentangle themselves from Russian political, cultural, linguistic, economic dominance so that they can enjoy the lives as they see fit.
Yeah, and I think the thing that strikes me as particularly galling is later in that on the Reuters article I was reading to get a sense of these comments was that he said something to the effect of when a Russian soldier steps foot on a location that is ours. There is this overarching imperialistic arrogance that I think is especially frustrating. And I was wondering, how has Russia's relationship with historical narratives surrounding Ukraine and the Crimean Tatars influenced their propaganda? How have people reacted to it? And how have they resisted it?
Mhm. Well, Ukrainians are resisting by um, rethinking their regional history and essentially diving deep into primary sources to reconceptualize the Russo-centric narratives in ways that they believe are more historically accurate, right? That's the big problem with Russian historical propaganda, is that it's designed to um, have people believe one thing that may or may not be true. So the resistance to it is really, there's a lot of historical resistance to these historical, confabulations, exaggerations, um, outright invention. And so I don't think that, like, for Crimean Tatars in particular are very familiar with the ways in which Russian historical narratives attempt to erase their history on the peninsula as part of a larger project of claiming that they're there for legitimate reasons. And so
Mhm.
um, Crimean Tatars and other Ukrainians are not going to be drawn in or confused by that. They are going to shrug and go on with um, the important work that they have to do in terms of pushing back Russian aggression.